The next supply of Lego bricks has arrived, which means I can finally continue building the airport. First of all, I quickly have to finish that off from 2 weeks ago. This is now the grass section right next to the airfield. I covered that up by 16 by 16 stud plates, and now we can continue building the airfield. First of all, with this diagonal taxiway leading onto the main part of the airfield. I completely revised that because I still needed to add brick modifieds. I'll show you that in just a second. And now this is super satisfying how exactly I've managed to completely get rid of the gaps with these diagonal edges right there. Just to quickly finish that off, and now these are the brick modifieds I was talking about. I added to the sides, allowing me now to add this double line, which indicates that airplanes have to halt just before entering the runway. Now, and when we continue building the main airfield right there, this part took me literally days to prepare with all the different modules I'm connecting right now. Now, in theory, the way this works, as a pilot coming from the runway, you now have 2 taxiways you can take, taxiway A and B. I'll mark that towards the end of the video. And now from each taxiway you have 2 directions you can continue, left and right, and this now leads you to the different parking spots of the planes, which I'll also number right there on the right hand side. You can see that with parking spot number 1, and this gap I left right there on the left hand side, this will be of course 2, I'll add in just a second. In between the different snot modules I'm adding, I'm always using normal bricks in order to lock everything in place, otherwise the entire airfield would have been way too unstable. This, by the way, is number 2 I've added right there. All these different lines I achieved by using brick modifieds within these snot modules, once again turning the studs by 90 degrees, and this then all snugly fits into place. Really satisfying how exactly that worked, but it also took me ages to build that. Now, everything at this point was a bit too smooth if you ask me, because if you look at airfields from satellite images, you can always see this sort of grit coming from the concrete slabs that I used to build airfields. And now my idea was that I might actually switch up building techniques in order to achieve that grit. And what I now tried out, but I'll say that right away, I'm not too sure about if I'm going to leave it like that, is use these 4x4 tiles. I've never used this piece in my life before, but I think this would be the perfect opportunity for that. Although it might be a bit more realistic, I know that, it also doesn't look as satisfying as the rest of the entire airfield. But once again, another advantage is that it locks everything into place. This is once again important because with all these other snot modules I'm adding right there, for example this road piece, all the taxiway markings, which I of course have to build using the snot building technique, otherwise the thin lines wouldn't be possible. And this is the big advantage because it simply locks everything into place. Back there, this is parking spot number 3. I might also add 4 and 5 at some point for smaller airplanes, but for now these are the 3 main spots around the terminal. Now I'll talk more about how exactly I like or dislike this grid in the middle of the airfield towards the end of the video. For now, I'd say let's continue with the taxiway markings we still have to add. Of course, as I've shown you earlier, we have 2 taxiways, taxiway A and B. This now is the sign for taxiway B for airplanes taxiing onto the runway, indicating that the end 15 of the runway is on the left hand side and end number 33 is on the right hand side of the runway. These numbers are, by the way, built using the exact same building technique I've also used over in the Wild West mock for the lettering over the saloon, the bank, and so on. I've now also added a hinge with another B connected to it. You'll see why that makes sense in just a bit. And there you can see, in case you were wondering, everything is locked into place and really holds together quite nicely. Now I've of course also prepared the sign for taxiway A, which only has a 15 attached to it because, well, that makes sense because it's at the very end of the runway. And now this is the main problem I have when adding these numbers. Unfortunately, everything is in the end turned away from the main perspective you have of the mock, which means in the end only an A and a B is visible to the visitor standing right in front of the mock. Well, this is a bit unfortunate, but this way around it's realistic. This right here is me experimenting how exactly I want to add vegetation to the entire thing. Of course, well, we have to add the signs as well we've just built. And now, as you can see with these plants, I tried out whether I want to have them lowered down, integrated into the green plates, which might look a bit more realistic, or if I simply want to stack everything on top of these studs, which would of course be much quicker, but on the other hand looks a bit too overgrown for an airfield, especially in combination with these taxiway lights on the edge. I've tried using less grass on the other patch right there, which I personally prefer a bit, although it's, well, much more complicated. Another thing I still have to add in this section right there are the reflective panels that are placed on the opposite side of the end of a taxiway, because under poor visibility, for instance, pilots can then see that they can no longer continue taxiing forward and have to either turn left or right. I've now used these plate modifieds right there and still had 2 studs remaining, which is a feature specific for this very piece right there, which now allowed me to add 1 layer of tiles facing outward on each side, which is a little fun, a bit more complicated building technique. The main problem I have when it comes to these signs is the combination between vegetation and the letterings, because as soon as I go down from this perspective, you can see the grass starts covering up the letters, which of course can't be, and therefore I now tend towards this option, although I dislike the empty space in between the different patches of grass. And what I now might do is maybe add a few studs in between. And also, for storytelling, I might add a lawnmower or something that just cuts down the grass, and therefore, well, although this grass might already be a bit too tall for an airport, it's currently being cut. Next up, you guys need to decide whether or not I should use these 4x4 tiles in the middle to achieve this grid structure from the concrete slabs. If I should keep that, or if you guys like it, I'm probably going to extend it a bit into this section as well, otherwise it looks a bit out of place, so we have to extend this area in order to make it look a bit more realistic. But in these areas with all the taxiway markings, I of course can't use concrete slabs because, well, otherwise I won't be able to add the thin lines. As you might be able to tell, on the outside of the airport right here, I'm going to continue all these taxiway markings, and then I'll probably add a few more parking spots for different planes, although in this case smaller planes like Cessnas, private jets maybe even, and so on. Then right here on this grass area, I'm going to add kerosene tanks. As you know, we have a lot of space right here, and then since we had kerosene tanks, of course, and the airport in general is quite dangerous, on the other side of the airport, right here, I'm probably going to add a giant fire brigade, depending on how much further I'm going to extend the airfield. The planning of the fire brigade is also the reason why I placed these giant green plates right there, temporarily at least, because that allows me to see how much further I want to extend the airfield and at which point it might actually look a bit too big. This, by the way, is the main problem I have. This empty space right here, as you know, will be for the terminal. Regarding the terminal, I've already started planning and experimenting with my first design ideas. Then, I haven't mentioned that so far, this red area right there, this will be the area for the vehicles of the airport that need to be parked. Although I currently fear, I'll have to say that right away, that I might actually need to extend these areas for the parked vehicles because they'll most likely be a bit too big. Since the next big bricklink order for the airport and also the first airplanes is currently stuck somewhere in the Netherlands and has been for over 2 weeks now, I'll most likely have to continue somewhere in the main Lego city in the next video, and then I guess I'll jump back and forth between the airport and then this section of the city. I'll also need to show you what exactly has happened over here regarding the lighting over the past few weeks, and with that being said, that's it for today's video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.